Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that the most explosive political event of the year wasn't a speech or a rally or even a campaign promise, but a quiet vote in a closed-door committee room that could fundamentally alter the economic landscape of our republic? And what if the true story isn't about one man's anger, but about a sudden terrifying realization within the halls of Congress that the financial stability of the executive branch might be compromised by foreign debt? We are living through a moment of immense noise. The mainstream media feeds on the spectacle, the all-caps posts on social media, the name-calling, the political theater. It is designed to distract us. It is designed to keep our eyes on the surface while the deep currents of history are shifting beneath our feet. But those of us who have watched the American economy through the decades, from the inflation of the 70s to the boom of the 90s and the crash of 2008, we know that the truth is rarely found in the shouting. The truth is found in the ledgers. The truth is found in the quiet, boring details of tax returns, loan agreements, and bank valuations. Today, we are going to turn down the volume on the political noise and turn up the focus on the facts. We are going to look at why a bipartisan coalition in Congress just took the unprecedented step of subpoenaing 25 years of Donald Trump's financial records, and why his reaction, an explosive meltdown on Truth Social, suggests that this is not a witch hunt, but a discovery of something far more significant. We're going to explore what this means for the rule of law, for our national security, and for the long-term stability of the American system that we, as taxpayers and retirees, rely upon. To understand the gravity of this moment, we must first look at the catalyst and the underlying economic conflict that drove this decision. It began with a vote, not a party-line vote that we are so used to seeing, where Democrats vote one way and Republicans the other, purely out of tribal loyalty. This was different. On December 9th, the House Oversight Committee met behind closed doors. The air in Washington is usually thick with partisanship, but in that room, the atmosphere changed. A vote was called to authorize subpoenas for Donald Trump's complete financial records, personal taxes, business entities, banking records, spanning from the year 2000 to 2024. The expectation, or the narrative we are always sold, is that Republicans would block this. They would protect the former president at all costs. But that is not what happened. When the roll was called, the measure passed 28 to 14. 6 Republicans broke ranks. Now pause and consider the weight of that. In the current political climate, for a Republican representative to vote for a subpoena of Donald Trump is not a casual decision. It is a career-risking move. It invites primary challenges, donor revolts, and public attacks. Yet 6 of them, sitting members from competitive districts in California, New York, and Pennsylvania, looked at the evidence presented to them and decided that their constitutional duty outweighed their political safety. Representative Nancy Mace of South Carolina, a figure who has often navigated the complex currents of Trump's support, stood up and delivered a speech that should echo in the history books. She argued that if Congress refuses to provide oversight when there are this many questions surrounding a candidate's finances, then Congress has abdicated its role. She essentially said that if we don't look now, we are not a check on power. We are accomplices to its abuse. So what did they see? What terrified them enough to break the party line? They saw the economic conflict. During that closed-door session, forensic accountants presented preliminary findings that pointed to what they called significant discrepancies in asset valuations. Now, to the uninitiated, valuation discrepancies sounds like dry accounting jargon. But you and I know that in the world of real estate and high finance, valuation is everything. The evidence suggests a dual reality. On one hand, figures provided to banks to secure loans were high, inflated to show immense wealth and low risk, thereby securing lower interest rates and better terms. On the other hand, figures provided to tax authorities for the exact same assets were low, deflated to minimize tax liabilities. This is not just smart business. If proven, it is the definition of bank fraud and tax evasion. It corrupts the marketplace. When a major player cheats the system to get capital they don't deserve, it tightens the market for honest businesses. It increases risk for the banks that hold the savings of ordinary Americans. We saw in 2008 what happens when the banking sector ignores risk and plays fast and loose with valuations. The housing market collapsed and retirement accounts evaporated. The Congress members in that room realized that this investigation wasn't just about politics. It was about the integrity of the American financial system. They saw a pattern of aggressive tax optimization that looked less like a strategy and more like a systemic deception. And that is why Trump's reaction was so immediate and so ferocious. Within minutes of the vote, the former president took to Truth Social. He called it a witch hunt. He threatened the Republicans who voted for it. He lashed out with a level of vitriol that sources say stunned even his closest aides. Why? Because he knows what a forensic accountant can do with 25 years of data. He knows that, unlike a political speech, a ledger does not lie. Let's go deeper into this data, because the media often focuses on the now. But to understand the economic reality, we must look at the 25-year view that Congress is demanding. Why 25 years? In forensic auditing, a single year can be an anomaly. A bad market, a specific loss, a one-time sale, these can explain away a lot of strange numbers in a single tax return. But 25 years? That reveals the architecture of the money. It reveals the flow. Congress is demanding personal returns, business entity returns, income sources, deductions, and, crucially, communications between Trump, his accountants, and his attorneys. They are looking for the intent behind the numbers. But the most critical aspect of this subpoena, the part that has likely caused the most panic in Mar-a-Lago, is the demand for foreign transaction data. The committee has specifically targeted disclosure of all transactions involving entities in Russia, Saudi Arabia, China, and Turkey. Let's look at this through the lens of a retiree concerned about national security. The United States Constitution contains a provision known as the Emoluments Clause. It was written by the founders specifically to prevent American officials from being beholden to foreign powers. They understood a simple truth. He who holds the debt holds the man. If a president of the United States owes hundreds of millions of dollars to a state-controlled bank in China, or if his properties are being propped up by cash infusions from Saudi Arabia or Russia, can he truly act in the best interest of the American people? Or will his decisions on tariffs, on treaties, on troop deployments be colored by his need to service his debt? This is not a theoretical question. The subpoena seeks to answer whether foreign money was flowing into Trump's businesses while he was in the White House, or while he was campaigning to return to it. We have precedents that suggest this fear is well-founded. We must remember the civil fraud trial conducted by New York Attorney General Letitia James. That was not a political hit job. It was a trial in a court of law where evidence was presented and scrutinized. The finding was clear: systematic inflation of asset values by billions of dollars. The judge didn't just call it an error, he called it fraudulent. We also have the case of Alan Weiselberg, the former CFO of the Trump Organization. This was the man who knew where every penny went for decades. He didn't fight to the death. He pleaded guilty. He admitted to tax fraud. When the man who manages the books admits the books are cooked, we have to listen. The forensic accountants advising Congress have indicated that the patterns they are seeing now are consistent with those past findings, but potentially on a scale that impacts national security. They are looking for back-to-back loans, where foreign money guarantees a domestic loan to make it look American. They are looking for properties sold at well above market value to foreign buyers, a classic money laundering technique. The subpoena for banking records is equally invasive. They want the loan applications. They want to see the emails where Trump or his associates told a bank, "This building is worth $500 million," while telling the IRS it's worth $50 million. If these documents are produced, there is nowhere to hide. You cannot spin a loan application. You cannot fake news a wire transfer. The data is the data, and that is why the resistance is so fierce. Now, as this investigation unfolds, you will inevitably hear a battle for the narrative that attempts to obscure this reality. You will hear that this is unprecedented. You will hear that Congress is overstepping. But let's fact-check that with history. It has been standard practice for presidential candidates to release their tax returns for 50 years. Richard Nixon released his tax returns while he was under audit. Every president since, until Donald Trump, understood that the public trust required financial transparency. The argument that this is harassment ignores the fundamental contract of public service. When you ask for the nuclear codes, when you ask for the power to regulate the economy, the people have a right to know if you are working for them or for your creditors. Trump's legal team is already filing emergency motions. They are claiming congressional overreach and violation of separation of powers. But legal experts, conservative and liberal alike, note that these arguments have failed in court before. The Supreme Court has already ruled that a president is not immune from criminal investigation and that Congress has broad oversight powers. However, the strategy here isn't necessarily to win in court ultimately, it is to delay. It is to run out the clock until the election. But here is where the shock factor of the Republican votes comes back into play. By making this a bipartisan subpoena, the House Oversight Committee has stripped away the partisan witch hunt defense in the eyes of the courts. Judges are far less likely to view a subpoena as political harassment when members of the target's own party voted for it. The bipartisan nature of the vote accelerates the legal timeline. It signals to the judiciary that this is a legitimate legislative inquiry, not a political stunt. This leaves Trump in a nightmare scenario. He is fighting a war on two fronts, the court of law and the court of public opinion. In the court of law, he is losing his traditional shields. He cannot claim executive privilege because he is not the president. He cannot claim it is purely partisan because of the 6 Republicans. In the court of public opinion, his meltdown on social media betrays his anxiety. If the records were clean, if they showed a wildly successful businessman who followed the rules, why not release them? Why not throw them on the table and say, look, I'm clean? The desperation to hide them is in itself the most damning piece of evidence we have so far. So why does this matter to us personally, and what are the implications for American taxpayers and retirees? Why should a retired teacher in Ohio or a veteran in Florida care about the accounting practices of a billionaire in New York? It matters because the economy is a fragile ecosystem built on trust and the rule of law. If we allow the highest office in the land to be occupied by someone who is financially compromised, we risk the stability of our entire nation. Imagine a scenario where a foreign power holds leverage over the president. That power could force trade deals that hurt American workers but help the president's personal business. It could force foreign policy decisions that weaken our military alliances but secure a loan for a hotel chain. This is the essence of the Emoluments Clause. It is not a dusty old rule. It is a firewall protecting your pension. If the president sells out American interests for personal gain, the markets react. Stability vanishes. The dollar suffers. Furthermore, there is the issue of tax fairness. We, the people listening to this today, have paid our taxes our whole lives. We had our wages withheld. We paid our property taxes. We played by the rules. When the wealthy and powerful engage in aggressive tax evasion, they are stealing from us. They are using the roads, the military protection, the legal system that our tax dollars paid for, without contributing their fair share. When a billionaire pays $750 in federal income tax, as was revealed in previous partial leaks, while a nurse pays $10,000, that is an insult to every hardworking American. But beyond the money, there is the issue of institutional integrity. The United States is exceptional because we are a nation of laws, not of men. No king, no general, no tycoon is above the law. If Donald Trump successfully defies these subpoenas, if he's allowed to hide 25 years of potential fraud and foreign entanglement and still take the White House, we have fundamentally changed the nature of our republic. We will have established a precedent that political power grants immunity. We will have said that if you are loud enough and popular enough, the rules do not apply to you. That is a dangerous world to leave to our grandchildren. The Republicans who voted for this subpoena understood this. They looked at the long game. They realized that saving the party was less important than saving the standard of the presidency. They understood that if they looked the other way, they would be setting a trap for the future, where any president, Democrat or Republican, could loot the Treasury or sell influence with impunity. Let us pause here to undertake a serious strategic analysis of what this event signals for the American economy, because this goes far beyond courtrooms and headlines. It reaches directly into your 401k, your property values, and the purchasing power of the dollars in your wallet. We often talk about fiscal responsibility in terms of government budgets, how much Congress spends versus how much it taxes. But there is a deeper layer of fiscal responsibility that underpins our entire way of life, the full faith and credit of the United States. That phrase is not just a slogan, it is the bedrock of the global economy. It is the reason the US dollar is the world's reserve currency. It is the reason we can borrow money at lower rates than almost any other nation on earth. But we must ask ourselves a hard question. What happens to that faith and credit if the world believes the American executive branch is effectively for sale? We need to understand the concept of a risk premium. In global finance, investors are constantly assessing the safety of where they park their money. When a country's leadership is viewed as unstable, corrupt, or compromised by undisclosed foreign debts, lenders do not just walk away, they demand a higher interest rate to cover that risk. This is why a mortgage in a corrupt developing nation might come with a 20% interest rate, while here in the US, we are used to much lower figures. The difference is the price of trust. If the President of the United States is seen as owing favors to foreign banks or governments, if there is a shadow of doubt about whether his decisions are made for the American people or to service his own private leverage, the perception of American stability cracks. Global investors who hold trillions in US debt start to worry. They ask, will this president make decisions to strengthen the American economy, or will he manipulate markets to save his own properties? Will he start a trade war, not for strategic advantage, but to punish a creditor? When that doubt creeps in, the cost of borrowing for the U.S. government goes up. And here is where it hits your kitchen table. U.S. Treasury yields are the benchmark for everything else in our economy. If the government has to pay more to borrow because of a corruption risk premium, then the banks automatically raise rates on you. You pay more for your mortgage. You pay more for your car loan. You pay more on your credit card debt. In a very real sense, the lack of transparency at the very top becomes a hidden tax levied on every American family. It is an inflation of cost driven entirely by a deficit of character. Furthermore, we must consider the strategic resilience of the US dollar. For decades, we have enjoyed the privilege of printing the currency that the world uses to trade oil, gold, and commodities. This keeps our import costs low. It means that when you buy electronics, clothing, or coffee, you're paying a price subsidized by the strength of the dollar. But that strength relies entirely on the rule of law. The dollar is strong because the world knows that in America, contracts are enforced, fraud is punished, and the rules of the game are the same for everyone. If we allow a system where the powerful can bypass the rules, inflating assets for loans while deflating them for taxes, or hiding billions in foreign entanglement, we degrade the integrity of our markets. We begin to look less like a superpower and more like an oligarchy. A low-trust economy is historically a weaker economy. If the rule of law erodes, capital flees. It moves to safer harbors, perhaps to Switzerland, or potentially to new digital assets outside of our control. If capital flees the United States, the dollar weakens, and a weaker dollar means that everything we import becomes drastically more expensive. That is the invisible inflation caused by institutional decay. It's not just about the price of eggs today, it's about the value of your savings 10 years from now. This brings us to the core of American prosperity and the concept of meritocracy. Our prosperity has always been built on a simple, powerful promise. The game is fair. If you work hard, follow the rules, and innovate, you can succeed. This is the engine of the American dream. Small business owners, the mechanics, the bakers, the farmers, the independent contractors, they file their taxes honestly. They fear an audit because they respect the law. They operate on thin margins, relying on their grit and their quality to survive. However, if we normalize a culture of high-level corruption, we invite the disease of crony capitalism into our system. In a crony economy, success doesn't go to the best product or the hardest worker. It goes to the most connected insider. It goes to the man who can secure a loan based on a lie, or the corporation that can buy a loophole. This distorts the free market. It misallocates capital to inefficient, corrupt businesses while starving honest, innovative ones. Think about the local competitor to a Trump property. Imagine an honest hotelier who reports their income accurately and pays their fair share of taxes. They have less capital to renovate, less money to advertise, and higher borrowing costs because they didn't lie to the bank. If their competitor is allowed to cheat with impunity, to inflate values for loans and deflate them for taxes, the honest business eventually goes under. The cheater buys them out for pennies on the dollar. When this happens across an entire economy, productivity collapses. We cease to be a nation of builders and become a nation of grifters. A culture of cheating is not an economy that can outcompete China or Europe in the 21st century. We must also look at the geopolitical angle of American resilience. Our greatest strategic rivals, particularly China and Russia, utilize corruption as a weapon of statecraft. They practice what is known as debt trap diplomacy. They lend money to leaders in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, knowing those leaders cannot pay it back. When the default comes, they don't ask for cash. They ask for ports, for mines, for UN votes, for silence. If the President of the United States is personally entangled in similar opaque financial webs, we lose our moral and strategic high ground. How can we demand that a developing nation resist Chinese bribery if our own executive branch is fighting tooth and nail to hide its own foreign ledgers? We become vulnerable to blackmail. A president who is terrified of his financial records being exposed is a president who can be manipulated. In a crisis, a blockade of Taiwan, a cyber attack on our grid, a conflict in the Middle East, we need a commander-in-chief whose only calculation is what is best for America, not what will keep my creditors quiet. Finally, let's speak to the legacy we leave our grandchildren. Fiscal responsibility is stewardship. It is the obligation to hand over a country that is solvent, sound, and just. If we shrug our shoulders at financial malfeasance because we like a candidate's political style, we are essentially looting the institutional wealth of the future to pay for our emotional satisfaction today. We are telling the next generation that truth doesn't matter, that contracts are meaningless, and that the law is only for the little people. That is the path to national decline. History is littered with empires that crumbled not from invasion, but from internal rot, from a loss of civic virtue and a collapse of trust in leadership. Conversely, the periods of greatest American strength, the post-war booms, the technological revolutions, have coincided with periods of high social trust and robust institutions. So when we demand transparency, we are not just asking for a peek at a tax return. We are demanding the preservation of the economic environment that allows your pension to be secure. We are fighting to ensure that American policy is made in Washington, D.C. for the benefit of American citizens, not in foreign capitals for the benefit of a single debtor. We are protecting the Made in the USA brand, ensuring it stands for quality and integrity, not corruption. Fiscal responsibility means ensuring that no one, absolutely no one, is leveraging the American flag to service personal liabilities. That is the only way to ensure the long-term prosperity of our nation. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe these economic shifts will strengthen or weaken the American middle class? Let's discuss in the comments below. As we move forward into the coming days, we can expect a gathering storm of political volatility. We will see more angry posts. We will see attacks on the judicial system. We will see attempts to distract us with culture wars and outrage. But I ask you to keep your eyes on the ball. Keep your eyes on the documents. Watch the court filings. Watch how the appeals move. Watch to see if those 6 courageous Republicans are purged from their party or if others join them. The question at the heart of this explosive meltdown is simple. What is in those records? Is it proof of a business empire built on a house of cards? Is it proof of loans held by adversaries of the United States? Or is it simply the chaotic records of a man who believes he is above the rules? Whatever the answer is, we deserve to know it. The American experiment relies on an informed citizenry. We cannot vote intelligently if we do not know who or what we are voting for. Transparency is not a luxury. It is a requirement for a free people. This subpoena is not an attack on a man. It is a defense of the office he seeks to hold. It is a demand that the President of the United States be free of debt to foreign powers and free of the shadow of fraud. The meltdown we witnessed this week was the sound of a wall crumbling, the wall of secrecy that has protected Donald Trump's finances for decades. Now the light is pouring in, and as we all know, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Thank you for your time, and I invite you to like and subscribe to join our community of informed citizens. Stay vigilant, friends. The story is just beginning.